Thank you for coming here. It's so nice of you all, Washington, to take time out of your busy schedules of ruining America to be here this evening. I'll also alert you that we are on the record here. We're on tape for our friends at C-SPAN, which is one of my favorite channels, actually, because during the nominating conventions, the only channel where you can watch the actual convention in its entirety without some pundit yakking, and you can see the convention actually happening over his shoulder. C-SPAN just shows you the the speech. But actually, though, in my favorite moment of that whole week, all the cable yackers. The first morning of the Democratic National Convention, all cable news was a bunch of various talking heads talking about what Hillary Clinton might maybe possibly say, and then I flipped to C-SPAN, and it was empty chairs on a silent stage for like a minute and a half because they were waiting for the people who were going to say something to show up. It's dignified. Sometimes there's something like dead air is fresh air, which I say as preface to my own yakking here. The only thing more dangerous than an idea is a belief. And by dangerous, I don't mean thought-provoking. I mean might get people killed. Take the Reverend John Cotton. In 1630, he goes down to the port of Southampton to preach a farewell sermon to the 700 or so colonists of the Massachusetts Bay Company. Led by Governor John Winthrop, a gentleman, farmer, and lawyer, these mostly Puritan dissenters are about to sail from England to New England on the flagship Arbella and 10 other vessels in the Winthrop fleet. By the time Cotton says amen, he has fought Mexico for Texas, bought Alaska from the Russians, and dropped napalm on Vietnam. Then he lays a wreath on Custer's grave and revs past Wounded Knee. Then he claps when the Marquis de Lafayette tells Congress that someday America will save the world. Then he smiles when Abraham Lincoln calls the United States the last best hope of Earth. Then he frees Cuba, which would be news to Cuba. Then he signs the lease on Guantanamo Bay. Cotton's sermon is titled God's Promise to His Plantation. He begins with one of the loveliest passages from the book of 2 Samuel, an otherwise R-rated chronicle of King David's serial killer years. Probably not the best thing to say on Yom Kippur. Chapter 7, verse 10, I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and I will plant them, that they may dwell in a place of their own and move no more. And sounds so homey, like that column in the real estate section of the New York Times about how people found their apartments. Till I remember that talk like this is the match still lighting the fuses of 1,000 car bombs. What Cotton is telling these about to be Americans is that they are God's new chosen people. This they like to hear. In fact, they have been telling themselves just that. The Old Testament Israelites are to the Puritans what the blues was to the Rolling Stones, a source of information, a renewable resource of riffs. What Cotton is telling them is that, like the Old Testament Jews, they are men of destiny. And like the Old Testament Jews, God has given them a new home, a promised land. And like the Old Testament Jews, God has printed eviction notices for them to tack up on the homes of the nothing special, just folks who are squatting there. It's fine, according to Cotton, to move into a country not altogether void of inhabitants if said country is really big. After all, he continues, Abraham and Isaac, when they sojourned amongst the Philistines, they did not buy that land to feed their cattle because they said, there is room enough. This is God's plantation, remember. Cotton says, if God be the gardener, who shall pluck up what he sets down? Hear that, Indians? No weeding of the white people allowed, unless they're Catholic or one of those Satan-worshiping Virginians. John Cotton is 46 years old. He is the most respected, famous, and beloved Puritan minister in England. Getting him to bless the send-off of these relatively unimportant castaways would be like scoring Nelson Mandela to deliver the commencement address at the neighbor kid's 8th grade graduation. In fact, once the colonists arrive in Massachusetts, they will name their settlement Boston in honor of Cotton's hometown. These people listening to this man are scared. There's a boat in the harbor that just might sail them to their deaths. They may never see their friends again until heaven or hell, depending on how this dumb plan goes. For years, they've grumbled that England is a cesspool governed by an immoral king under the spell of the whore of Babylon, which is their cute nickname for the Pope. But now that it's time to light out, their dear old mother country seems so cozy, all warm beds and warm beer and days of old lang syne. Yet, here is the smartest man in England, maybe the smartest man in the world, telling them, little old them, that they have been picked by God. They are Israelites is what they are. They are fleeing Egypt. Good riddance. Next stop, land of milk/honey. Now they know. They can do this. They can vomit their way across the sea. They can spend 10 years digging up tree stumps to plow frozen fields. They can even learn to love corn. For the first time in months, they can breathe. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. So much happens that you're going to miss out on right now. Oh, I'm just looking at it. Oh, the encouragement of literature. The name my friend has for his hard drive that derives from the outcries of Giles Corey as he was being executed in Salem. You'll just have to look it up later. Now I'm moving on to John Winthrop, who is also standing there. Legend has it Winthrop wrote and delivered his sermon, A Model of Christian Charity, on the Arbella in the middle of the Atlantic in 1630. Some scholars now contend he wrote it in England and delivered it back in Southampton before shoving off, perhaps on the very same occasion as Cotton preached his farewell sermon, God's Promise to his plantation. If that Winthrop-Cotton double bill is true, the only thing that would make the program a more exceptional event in the history of American exceptionalism is if Theodore Roosevelt showed up to conduct a brassy version of America the Beautiful performed by the United States Marine Corps Band. Reading Cotton's God's Promise to his plantation alone, hence that dissenting English Protestants had plenty of we're God's special chosen people talk to go around. So maybe Winthrop co-opting the image of a city on a hill from the Gospel of Matthew was just one more metaphor for the pile. Maybe that was the hill the city would be built on, a teetering stack of self-congratulatory biblical comparisons. Because of the City Upon a Hill soundbite, A Model of Christian Charity is one of the formative documents outlining the idea of America. But dig deep into its communitarian ethos, and it reads like an America that might have been, an America fervently devoted to the quaint goals of working together and getting along. Of course, this America does exist. It's called Canada. Every settler on the Winthrop fleet automatically became more important, more necessary just by leaving England. That is true for Winthrop most of all. In Massachusetts, he will be governor, the highest authority in the land. In England, he is at best a middling sort, an average member of the landowning gentry. He is a justice of the peace in his run-of-the-mill county in East Anglia. He is only friends with members of Parliament, not a member himself. And if he had ambitions to become an MP, they were surely dashed when Charles I scrapped Parliament altogether. That's one of the things you just missed. That was a big hubbub. Winthrop's friends in the Massachusetts Bay Company were shrewd talent scouts who saw something in Winthrop, some potential greatness, and recruited him to emigrate and become their CEO. Winthrop seized the faith of his peers as a revelation of God's calling. When a man is made to wade through a deep water, wrote Winthrop when he was mulling over the move, there is required tallness. Think about that on Election Day. This contradiction between humility before God and the egomania unleashed by being chosen by God is true of both Winthrop and the colony of Massachusetts itself. This man hopes for tallness for himself as well as for his future city, pitched in his mind above sea level on yonder hill. It is no accident that Winthrop speaks of God Almighty in his most holy and wise providence at the sermon's start. The English Puritans were obsessed with the idea of providence, and that word is more ominous to them than it sounds to us. It means care, but it also means control. It does not just mean that God will provide. It means God will provide whatever the hell God wants, and the Puritans will thank him for it, even if he provides them with nothing more than a slow death in a long winter. It means that if they're scared and small and lowly enough, he just might toss a half-eaten corn cob their way. It means that the world isn't fair and it's their fault. It means that God is the sovereign, the authority. It means manna from heaven, but it also means bow down. Winthrop and his fellow Calvinists believed in the doctrine of predestination. Did you know, I learned from my friend here that there's no sign for Calvinism. Things are really going to hell in this country, you know? Winthrop and his fellow Calvinists believed in the doctrine of predestination. Since God decides everything, God decides whether a person will end up in heaven or hell before the person is even born. The people who are going to heaven are called the elect. But here's the thing. How does anyone know? How does anyone know if he's saved? He can't. What he can do is work, try, believe, repent, love God, and hate himself. The diligent, hardworking, and pious are the visible saints. If a person seems saved, odds are he is saved. Thus, he will spend every waking hour trying to seem saved. Let's hazard a guess that some people are not going to be up for this. The constant uncertainty. In his journal, Winthrop writes the following about an acquaintance who was driven mad by spiritual doubt and took action to decide her fate once and for all. He wrote, "A woman of Boston congregation, having been in much trouble of mind about her spiritual estate, at length grew into utter desperation and could not endure to hear of any comfort, etc. So as one day she took her little infant and threw it into a well, and then came into the house and said, now she was sure she should be damned, for she had drowned her child." That's how heavy the weight of Calvinism can be, that a mother would seek relief in murdering her own offspring. But for John Winthrop and the men and women like him, this way of life is a stirring challenge, a thrilling project, and sometimes even a joy. Tallness, get up early, so much to do, never bored, reflect, overthink, repent. In his sermon, A True Sight of Sin, Thomas Hooker revels in the effort of self-examination. A half-hearted Christian sits in a comfortable chair and peruses his own sins by his fireside and happily reads the story of these in a book. A true Calvinist, on the other hand, is a kind of war correspondent on the move, one who has passed through many countries of barrenness and meanness and witnessed ruin and desolation. By going to the trouble of taking a hard look at his own crimes against God, the Calvinist knows what sin is and what it hath done, how it hath made havoc of his peace, and made him a terror to himself, which to these people is a good thing. This is the terror that keeps the sinner awake to his own shortcomings, and with fear comes adrenaline. In the spiritual diary Winthrop started keeping in 1606, he wrote a pious to-do list on May 23, 1613. He was 26. He pledges to God that he will carefully avoid vain and needless expenses. He promises to diligently observe the Lord's Sabbath, to try and keep his mornings free for private prayer, meditation, and reading. He will flee idleness and much worldly business. He will often pray with my wife. And the first time I read that, I wondered where I'd seen it before, and then I realized it was at the end of The Great Gatsby, the great novel of ambition. After the striving title character meets his tragic end, his father arrives from Minnesota for the funeral, bringing with him a book in which his son had inscribed a list of his ambitions as a youth. There is a rigid schedule that begins with getting up early and filling the day with work, exercise, and study. From 5 until 6 p.m., he is to practice elocution, poise, and how to attain it. Then, in a list of general resolves, he orders himself to quit smoking and wasting time, read one improving book or magazine per week, set money aside, and be better to parents. Gatsby's father tells Gatsby's friend, the list proves that his boy was bound to get ahead. Sure, his son had just died in a swimming pool, but at least it was a very fancy pool. The ambition and toil Calvinism requires will lead the economist Max Weber to coin the term Protestant work ethic to describe the Puritans' legacy of rolled-up sleeves. Tireless labor and ambition in pursuit of salvation, he opined, led to a culture of tireless labor and ambition and a new religion, capitalism. No wonder a German historian dubbed John Calvin the virtual founder of America. It makes sense that Winthrop, a man accustomed to setting lofty goals for himself, would then set lofty goals for the colony he is about to lead. A model of Christian charity is the blueprint of his communal aspirations. It is a glimpse at what the chief executive officer of the Massachusetts Bay Colony believed he and this grumpy few before him were supposed to shoot for come dry land. 2 words, he says, justice and mercy. And then I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to get to the heart of that sermon. Christ and his church make one body, Winthrop says, paraphrasing Paul. Furthermore, claims Winthrop, the ligaments of this body which knit together are love. Then he quotes Paul's letter to another church in Galatia, bear ye one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Keep that one in mind. Bear ye one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. You can think about that during the when you're paying for the bailout. The body of Christ, connected with the ligaments of love, is not merely pretty poetry or spiritual mumbo-jumbo to Winthrop and his people. It is a bond of marriage between him with a capital H, and us, which is to say it is a contract. Remember, Winthrop was a lawyer. That might be why the final paragraphs of Christian Charity, the ones that will be the most quoted later on, are the most profound. Given the task of outlining a binding legal pact between Massachusetts and God, Winthrop comes alive. We are, he writes, entered into covenant with him for this work. And I will make of thee a great nation, God had promised Abraham. The price of such greatness, as Cotton's farewell sermon already reminded the colonists, is a great big headache. Their duties, writes Winthrop, are these. Now, the only way to provide for our posterity is to follow the counsel of Micah, to do justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with our God. Micah, an Old Testament prophet, said that God's words do good to him that walketh uprightly. As for God's promise to the sinners, the mountains shall be molten under him, and the valleys shall be cleft as wax before a fire. Failures of justice and mercy and humility, Winthrop warns, will cause God to surely break out in wrath against us. Winthrop uses a word to describe such a calamity that must have been especially terrifying if he was delivering this sermon at sea: shipwreck. The only way to avoid this shipwreck, he says, is to be knit together in this work as one man. Winthrop then utters one of the most beautiful sentences in the English language. We must delight in each other, make others' conditions our own, rejoice together, mourn together, labor and suffer together, always having before our eyes our commission and community in the work, our community as members of the same body. I am a reasonably happy-go-lucky person with a serviceable sense of humor and a nice enough apartment in New York, the most exciting city in the world, no offense. Once I decided to devote years of my life to deciphering the thoughts and feelings of the dreary religious fanatics who founded New England nearly 400 years ago. I was often asked at parties by my fellow New Yorkers the obvious question, "What are you working on?" when I would tell them a book about Puritans, they would often take a swig of the beer or bourbon in their hands and reply with either a sarcastic, "Fun!" or a disdainful, "Why?" At which point, depending on my mood, I would either mumble something about my fondness for sermons as literature or mention taking my nephew to the Mayflower replica water slide in a hotel pool in Plymouth. I would never answer with the honest truth, namely that in the weeks after 2 planes crashed into 2 skyscrapers here on the worst day of our lives, I found comfort in the words of Winthrop. When we were mourning together, when we were suffering together, I often thought of what he said and finally understood what he meant. We were breathing sooty air, and the soot was composed of incinerated glass and steel, but also, we knew, incinerated human flesh. When the local TV news announced that rescue workers sorting through the rubble in search of survivors were in need of toothpaste, half my block, having heard that there was finally something we could actually do besides worry and grieve, had already cleaned out the most popular name brands at the corner deli by the time I got there. So at the rescue workers' headquarters, I sheepishly dropped off 14 tubes of Sensodyne, the toothpaste for sensitive teeth. We were members of the same body, breathing the cremated lungs of the dead and hoping to clean the teeth of the living. Should I end there? It's kind of sad ending, isn't it? I'll say this. This is a sort of kind of upbeat. Down later I'm talking about Winthrop and his fellow colonists. Despite their unruly theology, their sometimes hair-trigger hate, the fact that, oh, this doesn't work, this. No. Maybe this. These English had affection for the old Saxon word weal. It means wealth and riches, but it means welfare and well-being too. In Christian charity, Winthrop tells the colonists they must partake of each other's strength and infirmity, joy and sorrow, weal and woe. Later on, Roger Williams would write, "There goes many a ship to sea with many hundred souls in one ship, whose weal and woe is common and is a true picture of a commonwealth or a human combination or society." I will end the reading bit there. I'll take some questions, but I hope that sort of gets at the thing that drew me to Winthrop and this tiny little group of religious fanatics living in mainly Boston and then Rhode Island in the 1630s is their idealism and this beautiful these beautiful words about sticking together as they're about to embark on a voyage and perhaps a crisis. And on a personal note, as someone who came of age in the 80s and first heard Winthrop's sermon quoted to me by my then president, who often evoked the city on a hill, that would be Reagan, by the way. He called it, shining city on a hill, because he was a little more showbiz than Winthrop. And it always just seemed so ironic to me as someone who read the whole sermon that's about, charity and generosity. And remember that verse I read to you about, what was it? From Paul, about basically the gist of it was that helping each other is God's law. And so this sermon is all about that, about sharing, and if your brother needs help, if you love God and you can help him, you must help him. And it's basically Winthrop giving them this pep talk as they're about to, leave on this very dangerous trip to start very precarious new lives, that they're really going to have to stick together and they're going to have to help each other. And when, the former president would invoke this speech that's all about charity and generosity, all the while gutting programs like, housing and urban development and sending maybe millions of people into a life of homelessness and cutting school lunch programs. And I just found that a little ironic, and maybe my chapter on, that part of our history and how this speech was interpreted by, the person it's really most identified with is perhaps a little footnote on that fun period. of our history. So I don't know if all of this is self-explanatory, but if not, I will take some questions if you have them. Oh, a person will bring you a microphone.
Hello? Okay, thanks, sir. We have time for about 20 minutes of questions. So if you just raise your hand, we'll get you a mic.
Hi.
I sit down.
I would.
Of course, I had something prepared, and to hooey with that. I'm sitting here just crying because I'm thinking, gosh, that woman talks just like Sarah Vowell, because we listen to you all the time after we read your books and then listen again, and it's wonderful. But my question is, when really, was there a point, or I know points are often windows, when you turn to writing about history? You spoke to it before, but if you could do that again for me now.
Oh, when did I?
Because I love when you go back and forth into rock. I love when you use Nazi right after a wonderful description of Robert Todd Lincoln or whatever. So.
Oh, when did I start writing about history? Really just working on This American Life, and I was doing various kinds of stories and did one driving the Trail of Tears. Well, my sister drove it, and I rode in the passenger seat because I can't drive. And we made a documentary about that trip, and that was the first story where I worked on something historical, and that story just really changed my life. So ever since then, that's mostly what I want to do. Oh, thanks. I just liked, there was just so much drama and conflict and contradiction, and I just liked the whole process and the researching process. And also, to tell you the truth, as a reporter, I was kind of, I mean, I still kind of am one sometimes, but I'm kind of a terrible reporter in terms of interviewing a person who's living, because I don't like to pry. Actually, it's a really, you know, you'll notice that if you're an interviewer, you're either being a bad person or a bad reporter, or some like point in between. But you can't be a great person and a great reporter. You either have to like press your point and dig for the dirt, or if you're a good person, you go, okay, you don't want to talk about that. That's fine. I totally understand. That's how I am as a reporter. So there was something about just dead people. I was just better with them.
In the middle.
Okay.
This
Hi.
is a oh, that's really loud. This is a question about a character in the book, Anne Hutchinson. Mm-hmm. Was she a little bit crazy and really thought she heard voices? Was she showboating? And why would she bring that up when she's apparently about to be acquitted?
Let's see. Yes, yes, yes. And she liked the sound of her own voice. To backtrack, Anne Hutchinson is, what do I want to say about her? I mean, she's a very fascinating figure, and she, like Roger Williams, one of the other characters in the book, both of them were kicked out of Massachusetts and, you know, escaped to Rhode Island. Williams first and Hutchinson later. And she was the daughter of a minister who homeschooled her. She was one of those homeschooled students. And so at home, she basically received the best possible education, you know, an English girl of the 17th century could get, which is to say, not an official one with, you know, teachers and libraries and stuff. So she's, you know, she's a groupie of John Cotton, the great minister, and when he emigrates to America, comes to Boston to be the minister in Boston, she and her family, and her, that being her husband and her 15 children, she was a very fertile woman, they came and followed Cotton, and she started having these prayer meetings, ladies' prayer meetings in her home. These are incredibly common then and now. I went to one as a child. At first she would just have the ladies over and they would talk about Cotton's sermon the other day. And she would lead them to a discussion of that. But she slowly starts just sort of winging it and kind of preaching, essentially. And first of all, you can't be a Puritan minister without a degree in divinity, and she doesn't have that. Secondly, kind of a woman. That's also ixnay on the Omen way. And not only is she talking to women, more and more, they're coming to her house in droves, and men are coming too, including the young 26-year-old governor who Winthrop was voted out, and this very interesting fellow named Henry Bain the Younger was elected, and he becomes kind of her best friend. And so all these people are coming to her house, and she's telling them that John Cotton and her brother-in-law are the only ministers worth listening to, and all the others are crap. I'm paraphrasing. And her followers start going into all the churches in the colony and heckling the ministers and making trouble. And the colony is just like in disarray. These are the most argumentative, bickering people in the best of times. Massachusetts is always about to spin off into a million splinter groups anyway. And she is just the root of this huge rift that is breaking this people apart. And so she's hauled before the magistrates, before Winthrop and the other judges, and put on trial. And she outwits them. She basically says, I don't think I've done anything illegal. They say, you're fomenting dissent, essentially, and it's illegal for you to have these huge gatherings in your house. And then she has a scriptural answer for everything they throw at her, a verse about older women instructing the younger women. And so anyway, she basically acquits herself until the moment she doesn't, because she has an audience. Her audience is the most important, powerful men of the day, and she outsmarts them, outargues them, and then in a moment she just kind of loses her head and is so drunk on the sound of her own voice, she starts, saying what she believes. She's saying things like God's talking to her, and that she's filled with the Holy Spirit. We're used to that kind of talk from, evangelicals now, but to a Calvinist, this was distasteful and blasphemous. And someone even mentions they heard her give a prophecy once, a witch-like prophecy. The W word is invoked, and basically she digs her own grave, and this gets her thrown out and excommunicated. And so, was she crazy? It depends on whether you think a human being can hear the voice of God. If you think a person who hears the voice of God is crazy, she was. If you think that person is a prophet, perhaps she was that. But she was definitely like a very singular person, and the thing I love about writing about her and Williams, whether you agree with all of their beliefs or not, and some of them a little eccentric, I'm fascinated just how much they stuck out, because all the things I talked about before, the Puritan love of community, which is so beautiful, there's a dark side to that, which is everyone has to agree, and anyone who disagrees is booted out, or worse, like one guy gets his ears sliced off for speaking out against the magistrates. And so the thing I love about Hutchinson and Williams is that they stand tall. They're not afraid of anyone but God. And they say sometimes like really crazy stuff, but they believe it, and they just don't apologize for what they believe, and they speak out, probably too much. I'm sure they're pretty annoying people, really, but they have a kind of freedom that no one else around them seems to have, that I find kind of charming. They were just born too early. Like, they really should have been on like MSNBC or something. All those people yakking it up all day long on cable news, they would all have been booted out of Massachusetts.
We have another question up here.
Okay.
Thank you, Sarah, for leaving New York to come visit us.
That was nice of me, wasn't it?
It's very nice of you. This actually goes back to your last book, Assassin Vacation.
Okay.
I was wondering what your favorite part of the musical Assassins was.
My favorite part of the musical Assassins, I guess it's probably the duet of John Hinckley and Squeaky Fromme when they sing that love song, and it's a love song to Jodie Foster and Charles Manson, and the line is, "I will do anything for your love." You can think about that for a second. But another two, those people are, I think we can say, insane without, well, I'm sure we could be sued in Britain, but here we can say they're probably insane. But there's a real, not respect, but kind of empathy that Sondheim has for these, most of them lunatics, that I don't know if you can justify it other than to say, it's something I definitely try to do and think about, and I think it's probably something I learned working with Ira Glass, working on This American Life, because Ira Glass believes in the educational power of empathy, that you can learn more about someone, not if you try to like them, but if you just try to understand where they're coming from. And there's something about that song between those two lunatics they believe what they believe, and if you want to find out why someone would try and do something so horrific, maybe it's worth knowing that person's motivation. You don't have to condone it, not at all. Just there's something to be said for empathy, and like what I've done here tonight, I read from you some of the beginning bits and talked about some of the beauty and the ideals of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, but I'm setting you up for some of their less adorable actions that come later on. There are various violent crackdowns. There's a genocide, and one person I was talking to yesterday said she felt kind of swindled once she got to the Pequot massacre, and 700 Pequot, the English burn alive 700 men, women, children. And she's like, "Why did you do that? You made me like him." And then, that happened, and I was just confused. I was like, well, what would be better, to just start with the mass murder? Not good from a showbiz point of view, certainly. But also, like, aren't all unspeakable acts created by people, and like by humanizing them first, and then their actions later on, the slaughter and all that, seems to me all the more horrific. And I don't remember what your question was. I'm sure I answered some question in there. When you were watching, you're probably following the presidential campaign. You're used to no one answering the questions.
Thank you. Yeah, I love all your books, but I think I love your travelogues the best. Because they're educational. They have a strong sense of sort of patriotism in them, and a strong sense of sort of love of history. Are you planning anything like that again? Something that's really kind of a pure travelogue, something closer to Assassination Vacation?
Do you have a problem with Calvinism? Just kidding. I don't know. We'll see. I'm thinking about something on the history of Hawaii, and there are a lot of like more travelogue kind of aspects of that. But I don't know. We'll see. I never know what I am going to do until I do it. Like the writer Ian Brown says there are two kinds of writers: the ones who write because they have something to say, and then the ones who write because to find out what they think. And I'm definitely the latter person. It's hard for me to plan. So I can't really make any promises. I am done with Puritans, if that makes you feel better. Oh, hi, Aunt Fran. I
Hello.
didn't see you there. I never mind.
I found out kind of recently that I'm descended from a couple people from the Massachusetts colonies. One guy on the Mayflower, George Sewell, which makes me a cousin of Barack Obama, and Reverend John Lathrop, which makes me a cousin of Sarah Palin. What do you think these folks would think about either of these folks?
I don't know. I don't know. Is Sewell one of the Salem judges? I don't know what a 17th century music teacher would think about Sarah Palin. I really don't know.
One here in the back left.
Hello.
Hi.
How's it going? I was really interested that you talked about the dual meaning of the word providence, that it was not only God's providing, but also being really thankful for whatever God provided.
Yeah, I'm definitely a glass half empty kind of person.
I remember Thomas Jefferson and a lot of the other founders, people who are deists and very far removed from the Calvinists, often spoke of providence. Is there a direct linkage? Is there a heritage there? Is there some connection between Winthrop and these guys and Jefferson later on?
I don't know that there's, I mean, there is in that it's, you know, I think it's part of English Protestant tradition at that point. Like everyone and his brothers mentioning providence, and it's mentioned, and the guy who coins the term manifest destiny, you know, he throws in providence in that paragraph where he coins that term. So I don't think there's a direct link from Winthrop to Jefferson exactly. Though there are some interesting correspondences between Jefferson and Roger Williams, not about providence, but you know, both of them, Roger Williams first obviously, used the term wall of separation in arguing for, this is what a presidential candidate would do. I don't know is the answer to your actual question. Now I'm giving the answer I'm giving. And there's no, you know, there's no evidence that Jefferson ever read Williams when Jefferson calls for a wall of separation between church and state. But it is sort of interesting that that it's kind of in the air with the Puritans first. Of course, Roger Williams wants there to be separation between church and state because he doesn't want the state to mess up his church. And Jefferson was kind of interested in, you know, the other way around.
Well, thanks for making history so much more interesting than it was when I was in high school.
Oh, like that would be hard.
I'm curious if doing this research affected in any way your spirituality or your sense of God or your beliefs.
No. I don't believe in God, but I'm interested in people who do. I mean, not just people who believe in God and I don't believe in God. I'm interested in writing about people who are not like me. I'm also interested in reading about people who are not like me because that's sort of, to me, the joy of reading and of writing. Because I'm actually, it's not that I'm a boring person, but I live what would seem probably to other people a kind of boring life in a way. It's very pleasant, my life, and thus not terribly dramatic. And like these people, you know, they're getting on, first of all, I wouldn't step on a boat I can't go take the ferry to Weehawken, I hate boats so much. Right there, I'm interested, you know, they're on those like little tiny cruddy ships for weeks and weeks, so that they have me there. And then, you know, like, not to brag, but I would not set 700 people on fire. I love writing about them. I mean, it's interesting to try and figure out, because most of us are like that. And like if you read the newspaper every day, if you're like me, you just like read it thinking like, who would do this, you know? And so part of, I guess, writing for me is writing about people with whom I do not identify most of the time, including the ones who believe in God.
Sarah, could you say something about, or more, if you would, please, about this notion of American exceptionalism, and particularly that sense I mean, you feel it kind of in this campaign, the notion that America has this responsibility, so to speak, where it's this shining something to the world. In the experience of the early Massachusetts colony, was that exceptionalism content to stay at home, or was it always some sort of, I have to take it someplace else, to somebody else? You know, expansionist as opposed to, I'm happy being here by myself.
Yeah, I do. I think. Well, they certainly believed in themselves as that they were God's new chosen people, and they pretty much thought any place that got them was lucky to have them. And you know, as they spread out, as they settle Connecticut, as they settle, you know, further and further west, their presence was seen as inherently good, I think. I mean, one reason Roger Williams gets kicked out of Massachusetts is that he questions whether that Massachusetts has the right to be there to that land, because when Williams found what would become Rhode Island, he gets the Narragansett permission. And John Cotton is so flummoxed by this idea, you know, that he thinks it is God's plan to, you know, subdue the earth, and they are the people that do that. There's just, that's another reason I'm fascinated by them, because their sense of self-worth and self-esteem collectively, I mean, it's something that we inherited from them as a country, and it's really difficult to escape. I mean, I even talk about how I still kind of buy into it, this notion that we're God's new chosen people, and as I mentioned, I don't even believe in God. But this notion of ourselves is so powerful, it's very difficult, you know, to escape. And when I really started working on this book was after Reagan's funeral, and Sandra Day O'Connor was reading a model of Christian charity at the National Cathedral, not so far from here, and she got to the part where it says, "The eyes of all people are upon us." And she was reading that, you know, recall the funeral happened just right after the Abu Ghraib photos came out, and the eyes of all people were upon us, and what did they see, you know? They saw that girl in fatigues standing in front of a pyramid of naked prisoners with her thumbs up. And the thing that Winthrop and Cotton and their peers had that we have sort of lost was that Winthrop and Cotton, the fear of failure. And to Winthrop, the city on a hill wasn't just a beacon of hope. It was that they could fail, and failure to them was to disobey their God, and their God had commanded them to take care of one another. And just that fear of failure is inherent within Cotton's sermon and Winthrop's sermon. So it's there basically on day one of American exceptionalism. What if we mess up? Let's try not to mess up. Oh my God, what if we mess up? And I think we've lost that fear a little bit as a country. Like, you know, I mean, I guess that's one reason I wanted to write this book, because I think it's something, it's, you know, like, I don't know what your flaws are. I'm pretty well aware of mine, and I do try and, you know, if you have any kind of self-awareness, you try and, you know, compensate or at least be aware of your faults. And American exceptionalism, the idea that America is inherently good, and I do believe strongly that we inherited this idea from Massachusetts Bay, it means that if we do it, it's good. And I don't find this opinion to be particularly Christ-like, to say nothing of particularly logical. Again, I can't remember what your question was. Can you actually, this young man has been holding his hand up, distracting me. Yes.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Distracting you. I'm not such a big fan of reading.
Really?
But every time I look at one of your books, I notice that it has a little figurine on the front. And I'm just wondering, why do you always use figurines?
Why do I always use figurines on the cover? Well, the photographer who makes the covers, his name is David Leventhal, and your name is David too? Well, my friend David, all of his photographs are Polaroids, large-scale Polaroids of toys, frequently vintage toys. And the reason I'm drawn to them, and the reason I think they're good covers for my books, is there's a kind of, I love how he combines these playful things, these toys, with a kind of moodiness and a very moody lighting, you know? So there's both a sense of play and an ominous sense of foreboding at the same time, which is how I pretty much view the world, and it's how I write my books and how I tell my stories, both of those two things. So that's pretty much why. And also he lets me use them, which is also an important step in getting them onto the cover, the permission. So high and low. Thank you for asking, though. I hope, you know, I work with kids and writing and reading and everything, and I feel like a lot of kids, especially boys, they get, you know, they're told the reading is just so great and you should be reading. And then if you read something like, oh, I don't know, a comic book or a joke book, people put that down. No, not at your house. That's good. Because I hope you decide to read more and find ways to enjoy it, and just read the things you like, and it doesn't matter what they are, because I guess I just hope that for you, because I hope that for anyone, because for me, I think of myself as a reader before I'm a writer. And it's one reason I wanted to write about these people in particular, is because for all their faults, and there are many, they loved to read, and they loved words and writing, and you know, they were pioneers basically, who have to like grow their own food and build their own houses. And you know, they did this while they were doing this. They were writing books and letters and journals like you wouldn't believe, and they had just barely finished building their houses, and they start building Harvard because they want they believe in education as much as anything except for God, you know. And so the thing I love about them is they do have this, they have this love of words, and I hope that comes to you, because it can be, reading can just be such a comfort, I think, and in a sometimes uncomfortable world. But thank you for your question, and I wish you much reading ahead. Thank you all for coming. I'll see you later.